It comes from a place of perhaps ignorance, whereas these, my friends, they were very well informed about their religion, and of course they were still learning, and they continue to learn. I'm sure they haven't abandoned the faith, but I admired that early devotion, certainly. I thought it gave such a strong moral compass at such an early age, which I feel is lacking in the European Western countries quite a bit. So that's hats off, much respect, and I've always had respect for my girlfriends.
Fantastic. When it comes to the concept of God, do you believe in God, or you believe in a higher power or necessary being? How do you define your kind of concept of God?
Well, you see, I work in art, so it sort of has an ethereal and universal appeal. A lot of the modernists strove to make sense of the spiritual realm through their art, and the way that they defined it was almost like a universality and an interconnection between every single organic form that surrounds us. And in that sense, that's where I've rooted my belief in a higher power. But I wouldn't take the form of God, because it almost feels like it's an attempt by humans to make sense of something that really we never really truly will.
What if an argument or a postulation was put forward to you? Would you be open to kind of exploring it, or is that something that you've closed the door to?
I've heard many iterations of it in my short life, so I'm sure I'll hear more. But it doesn't appeal to me because, again, I think it comes from perhaps an arrogance of the human being that is an attempt to contain something that can't be. And so I don't seek them out, because it feels futile to me almost.
Okay, feel free to stop me or tell me if you've heard this before. Okay. I'm gonna add to your pile, and hopefully this will be a bit more kind of appealing or logical, because I'll come from a Cartesian kind of point of view. The Cartesian point of view is when somebody is very skeptical and they say, you know what, because this is what Descartes did. He said, look, let's just say I strip everything away. What's the thing that I can be, most, or what can I accept? And he said, I think, therefore I am. Yeah, and then you go from that thinking, or even you go to the Avicenna point of view, which is existence. I'm sure you accept that you exist, that there is existence around you, yeah? So the argument that I'm going to kind of come from is contingency. It's the argument from dependency. That, have you heard this before? Okay, fantastic. So I'm sure you agree that the universe around us and we are dependent, contingent, I'm going to use the word dependent, and you can't have an infinite regress of dependent things, otherwise it leads to an absurdity. You agree with that, isn't it? So for example, I depend on oxygen depends on X, and that depends on Y, and so then the question arises that if you have an infinite regress of dependent things, it doesn't logically work. And sometimes it sounds all well and good, but when this analogy was posited to me, it kind of made sense, which is, let's just say I am to throw a ball into a net, and I need to ask permission from someone else. They have to ask permission from someone else. They have to ask permission from someone else. If it goes on ad infinitum, I will never get to throw the ball into the net. So there has to be a logical end to the chain, which philosophically they call it the necessary being. So the necessary being is where you have the likes of, all these philosophers, they're okay with the necessary being. But then the question I think arises is, okay, who is that necessary being, or what is that necessary being? And I would argue that because it's a necessary being and the contingent things depend on that necessary being, there needs to be there are logically certain qualities that necessary being would have. Number one would be logically independence. Yeah, because naturally, because it's the end of the chain, we depend on it, has to have independence. It has to have will. Because if we rely on the necessary being and we have come from the necessary being, then I guess the question is, why is the universe one way and not another way? And being an artist, my wife's an artist, so when you said that, because I've been seeing her paint for the last couple of days, and it's nice. I have a lot of respect for artists, because I used to be a primary school teacher as well, but even when you're painting a canvas or you're looking at a landscape, the reason why I respect them so much is because they look at every single detail that goes into the canvas that the average layman would miss, and the immense amount of patience that you have as well to kind of sit there, and that's why I guess it's just so fascinating. So I guess as an artist, you'd appreciate that when you're painting something, you have a lot of options. I mean, they say with Vincent van Gogh, he only painted with primary colors because he wanted to kind of restrict himself. But when it comes to other painters, they have a lot more options. So I guess with Will, I would argue that because the universe is one way and not another, because it was formed in one time and not another time, it indicates towards a will. And also power. If we look at the universe, we see power, we see design, we see intricacies, beautiful, fantastic colors and textures, just amazing. So that leads to, I guess the conclusion or the postulation that the necessary being should be intelligent, should be wise. And I guess the conclusion, sorry, I didn't catch your name?
I'm Zoe.
Zoe, nice name. So Zoe, it then leads us to think, you know what? If we believe that the necessary being is intelligent, it leads to a logical conclusion that they are wise as well. He is wise as well. Reason being, because firstly, when you look at the design around you, it points towards wisdom. And also somebody who's wise wouldn't just leave everything or wouldn't create something and just leave it, as some people postulate, because I think that goes against intelligence and wisdom. If I'm sitting and I'm creating something, I have an intention in mind. I have a will, I have an objective in mind. So those people that say, no, we were just created and we were just left to our whims, I think it's logical to assume that God, who is intelligent, who has a will, who has power, wouldn't just leave us be. He would make some attempt to impart his wisdom upon us, just like a teacher would impart their wisdom upon a student. What do you think about what I've said, the logic of it all, or does it make sense? Does none of it make sense? You're more than welcome to challenge it, to be honest. I mean, I'm not here to kind of convert you.
I realise that it'd be a difficult journey regardless. But I would say for myself, I recognise the beauty that surrounds us, and I engage in it, and but I don't believe that we necessarily have to go as far as devoting our whole lives to thanking its existence and worshipping this higher intelligent being that has endowed us with these possibilities and opportunities and this beauty around us. Really, I come from a rugged individualistic perspective in which you are given this opportunity, make something of it, find purpose. Perhaps there's some intrinsic purpose that you must seek out. But if anything, you can't just exist on the intrinsic. You must make something and take action for yourself and make decisions for yourself. And so in that sense, I say, make life beautiful. You're given one opportunity, make life beautiful. And one thing that I do enjoy about religious doctrine are the morality and the values that it imparts upon the individuals that decide to subscribe to it. And that I don't believe is a necessity for life, but I do believe that it benefits you if you do abide and stick to those. And so in that sense, I derive from religious doctrine what is useful for me, but I allow myself to be an independent, free individual.
Do you think that would work? Like, let's just say we extrapolate that. Do you think that would be kind of the right ingredient for a society when everybody is thinking individualistically in terms of, for example, where they derive their morality? I guess that's the problem that we're seeing in society now, because it's gone too far that people have, there's no real moral compass. And I guess I was looking into this as well, because quite a few people make this argument, and I thought, it's definitely worth looking into. And it's that if we're too open, there's no kind of direction, there's no there's nothing that will kind of hone us in. And I guess because a necessary being of God has created us, there are certain truths. For example, you're 100% right, there are certain things that we can probably derive from our surroundings. We know not to hurt somebody and to be kind and all this. But I would argue that there are certain things that you actually can't posit universally. And those things, if left to our own devices, it's quite detrimental. For example, I mean, even if you look at the argument of, abortion and stuff like that, people become very passionate about that. And I'm not sure if you heard, just a few weeks ago, there was a case of a woman, I think she aborted a child after, 3 months. So in this country it's illegal. So she was obviously she was, taken by the authorities, but there was a big march saying, no, she should still be allowed to do that. So how would you say, in your worldview, would you kind of draw boundaries with regards to stuff like that, conundrums like that?
I don't believe in policing individuals' decisions as long as they aren't legally binding. But equally, when it comes to your own self, you are your own master ultimately. You do as you please. Now, the fact that child had no consciousness means that this woman still had the power to do as she pleases. Now, legally, it wasn't right, but I believe that she was in her right to. If this was not right for her, why bring that child into this world? She would have been a terrible mother. She spared that child something, but she's being ostracized for it, for better or for worse. Perhaps she realized a bit too late, or perhaps she isn't being intentionally cruel. Then perhaps she should be punished for what she did. But then again, no, because it is her own body. You do as you please.
Interesting.
Back in the day, you couldn't commit suicide because it would have been illegal to commit suicide. I know. I think it's like 18th century. How pointless! How brilliantly pointless! Do as you please. If in fact you're probably sparing the world. If this is how you feel, do what you need to do.
What if that results in the oppression of minorities? But because I'm pretty sure you're kind of going towards the greatest good for the greatest number.
The greatest good for yourself, really.
What if the greatest good to thyself is harming another individual?
That's never really the case. If anything, that's the delusion of the mind. That's a mental illness.
But I mean, let's just say you're in a ring and quote unquote is legal and you're harming the other person, but it's done according to the rules. But it gives you joy. Like, for example, gladiators. They would be thrown into the ring. People would derive pleasure from it. I mean, there would be a law saying that it's okay. You would say that it's a cancer of the mind or it's a disease of the mind. But how would you get that across to the people that are convinced that no, it's fine because we're deriving pleasure from it?
The gladiator chose that for themselves. I mean, I have also heard of prisoners being forced into that, but I assume that was just that society's version of punishment. Every society will have their own take. But if in a gladiator's case, that is a choice. They chose that whatever happens to them, they've agreed. They sort of.
I don't think they had a choice.
The gladiators?
Yeah, they didn't have a choice.
Perhaps that was their punishment then.
Do you think that's okay?
Do you know, we're no longer in ancient Rome, so different standards apply. It's, for instance, I had this sort of argument about a week ago where someone said that Paul Gauguin was a paedophile who was an artist because he went to Tahiti and he slept with a 14-year-old. And in that society at the time, that was still frowned upon, but it was actually perfectly legal. And so, ultimately, can we impose our moral understanding and our legal obligations upon a different time period? We really can't. And so in that sentiment, I speak about the gladiators as well. I can't impose my present belief because it doesn't fit in the time.
It's in the past.
Absolutely.
Maybe a more contemporary example like torture. Whilst you've got people that are pro-torture, they'd say that, look, we're saving so many lives. This person, like you say, is diseased in the head. Or let's just say we take it one step forward and we say, if we were to torture this individual's daughter, who is innocent, she hasn't done anything. However, we know this person will give up the secrets to whatever he's doing if we torture the daughter. What do you think about that conundrum? Is it okay to torture this individual's daughter to save the lives of so many others?
Under what circumstance does this happen? These sort
A
of,
thought experiment.
a thought experiment. Perhaps it would be. Perhaps it would be. But I would never find myself in such a situation. You see, really, I root all of my understanding in the here and now and what is in front of me and what conflicts I will face. More often than not, there's so little at stake, and it's because I don't really find myself in a position of power. Perhaps for the best, considering that I don't actually have a stance on such sort of theoretical situations, which could be true for others, but not for myself. I really am a strong believer in the self, the individual, and I believe that the individual should strive to be the best version of themselves for the society that they live in. And every society will have a different version of that. The version of society I've been placed in is Western Europe, and I grew up there. I share some of the moral values. I have a sort of a foundation of religious understanding, and that guides me just as much as I require it to, or probably develop over time. But really, I believe in empowering the individual to do what is necessary for them and what they
That's interesting.
Their purpose.
Okay,
that's really where I stand.
I think you've made a good point, because I thought it was just okay. So you're saying empowering the individual. How would we go about empowering the individual, and with what?
Really, I will never impose the way that I've brought up upon everybody else as being the right way to go about it. But I will say that...
How do you decide the right way?
My parents, because they gave me the tools to allow me to navigate this world in order to make the most of the opportunities that are provided to me. And that is how I know that whatever, for all their faults and flaws, they did something right, because I find myself 7 years after leaving the home able to make the most of opportunities, build something, build my own vision for myself, and find my purpose and work on fulfilling my purpose. And in that sense, it was a good upbringing.
I'm sure it was. I mean, the fact that we're even standing here having a polite conversation, surely they did do a good job. But unfortunately, when it comes to the masses or the people in general, it's unfortunate not everybody will be fortunate to have wonderful parents like yourself. And because of that, and like you've also acknowledged as well, there's that nature-nurture argument as well, which is you might be in certain situations, certain scenarios, there might be certain things happening to your family that will make you think that certain decisions are actually okay. And you may not be fortunate enough to kind of have people telling you or even kind of having a morality that is objective. Because a lot of things, unfortunately and sadly, do come from the top down. You've got people that are more in power. They will tell us, look, the best way to object against the government is through peaceful means, and don't come to the streets, don't do this, don't do that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, if we rely on ourselves, when we rely on nature and nurture, when we've got people changing history, when we've got people manipulate, I'm sure you've heard of the nudge theory as well. Noam Chomsky said manufacturing consent. So when we've got all of this happening, I would argue, Zoe, that we need an objective morality. Yes, certain people may have derived certain morals from certain aspects of religion, and that's fantastic. But for the masses, they may not be as lucky. And for them, it's important to kind of, firstly, we acknowledge that there is a being who's created us. Number two, now when we look that there's certain religions, how do we tell the difference, or how do we kind of critique each holy book? What's the criteria? And I would argue that the criteria is, number one, the veracity of those holy books. For example, when you look at the Quran, are you familiar with the scientific method?
Not entirely.
So there's something called the falsification. So science, if done right, the aim is you come up with a hypothesis and then you prove it to be false. Yeah, and then if it's not false, then that's fine. It's a theory. You don't try to prove that it's correct. So because of the falsification theory, so there's a falsification kind of aspect in the Quran as well, where the Quran invites people that, look, it's from God, If you have an issue and you think it's not from God, firstly, bring verses like it, find a contradiction in it, find an issue with it. And of course, I'm sure you've heard the Quran is 1400 years old, and people haven't found a contradiction that's worthy of, say, being broadcast everywhere. And otherwise, the Speaker's Corner, anyone can come here and say, aha, you know, you've made this claim, or we'd be bashed on the heads with that contradiction again and again and again and again. But that's not the case. People don't come and bash us over the head with that. The Quran, when you look at the manuscripts, when you look at preservation, because certain religions will make a claim, and then I say, look, was that the book that was revealed at the time of your founder? And they say, no, it's the things that have been passed down. And I would argue that not only do prophecies need to be present in that holy book, but prophecies that can be verified by an external source. And also, you've got the holy book. I need something empirical. I need, manuscript evidence. I need stuff in there that, like you rightly pointed out, is morally, helpful and beneficial to my life. So I can say that Islam has all of those things. Prophecies. For example, let me posit a question. Let's just say, I'm sure you've heard of Nostradamus. So Nostradamus, especially in the Western culture, he's kind of linked to the Mayans, if I'm not mistaken, or if I am. But Nostradamus, he famously said 2012, the world will come to an end. And
Yes.
and there was that, they actually did. I remember I was quite young, and